Thank you all for coming tonight to our town hall meeting. My name is Kathleen Drew. I am an Arlington parent. I am also the education coordinator for the DEA Museum, and I will be emceeing tonight's town hall meeting. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I look forward to having a great time of learning, questions, answers, and hopefully some laughter. We hope that by the end of this program, you will leave having learned something new and that everyone feels a little more comfortable having conversations between parent and teens. We do know that teens make their choices based on all of the information available, not just what they get from the media. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize some special guests. Abby Raphael, could you please stand and wave? County School Board member. Abby was instrumental in getting Second Chance started in Arlington. Laurel Sarud, one of our 4 substance abuse counselors in Arlington Public Schools. Here, all right. She can talk to you one-on-one about what these important counselors do. Siobhan Bowler. All right. Siobhan is on the board of Second Chance and can answer questions about this educational program in Arlington. And Tito Vilches works with gang reduction. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight's program is organized by Arlington's Ready Coalition. We provide an ongoing community-wide forum to create a healthy, successful community for all of our children to grow up and live. We want to increase abstinence from alcohol and drugs among our youth and to delay the initial use to a time when they are more mature, with fully developed brains that can make choices best for them. We're fortunate to have 4 very wise panelists tonight who will be addressing our topic from differing points of view. Dr. Howda, on my right, is an emergency physician and pediatric emergency physician at Innova Fairfax Hospital and the medical director of the Ewing Forensic Assessment and Consultation Teams Department. Dr. Howda completed a residency in emergency medicine at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore and completed his 2-year fellowship in pediatric emergency medicine at Innova Fairfax. He is board certified in emergency medicine, pediatric emergency medicine, and forensic medicine, and has worked as a medical examiner and a death investigator for over 15 years. He is a board member of the Unified Prevention Coalition of Fairfax County, our sister coalition in Fairfax, and has spoken to thousands of teens about the risks and dangers of substance abuse since 1999. He is joined tonight by 2 of his 4 school-aged children. Next to Dr. Howda, we have Dr. Gaia Dowling. She is currently the chief of the Science Policy Branch in the Office of Science Policy and Communications at the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA, part of the National Institutes of Health. There, she helps to educate a variety of audiences about the science of drug abuse and addiction, developing, guiding, and targeting communications for many different audiences, including Congress, the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, other federal agencies, constituency organizations, physicians, and the general public. Dr. Dowling earned a PhD in neurobiology from the University of California at Davis. Along with publishing multiple scientific papers and a range of multimedia products, Dr. Dowling has earned numerous awards and widespread recognition for her work, including receiving an Emmy Award for NIDA's contributions to the HBO documentary Addiction. Dr. Dowling is also an Arlington parent. Next to Dr. Dowling, we have Corporal Jim Toomey. He has been with the Arlington County Police Department since 2001. His positions during his career include midnight patrol, evening patrol, and crime scene agent. He is currently the master police officer for the School Resource Unit and one of the explosive ordnance detection canine officers. He is assigned to Yorktown High School. And finally, we have Chris. Chris went to middle school and high school in McLean, Virginia. He is 25 years old and used drugs, starting with marijuana from the ages of 13 to 22. He's been sober and in recovery for 3 years. Chris is currently in school for social work and business and is working at Starbucks. Chris's road has not been an easy one, and we are fortunate to hear his story. We have asked each panelist to speak for no more than 10 minutes from their area of expertise. After each of the four have spoken, at the end, we will open the floor for questions. We also have cards if you would like to ask a question anonymously. One of our ushers will take the card and someone will read it for you. And ushers will be passing cards down the rows right now. So we'll begin with Dr. Howda.
Good. Thank you all for coming. I know you had to take time out of a busy schedule in order to be here tonight, but it's important that we have this discussion, and I'm going to try to keep my remarks as brief as I can on my perspective on this, so that we can have that discussion, because I think there's a lot of information to impart both ways, and a lot of things that we need to talk about, not amongst ourselves as adults, but obviously with our youth. So not in any particular order, but it kind of worked out that way. I'm going to talk briefly about some of the brain effects that we see as physicians, as we understand from the medical side, and then touch on a couple of the other topics that commonly a physician might get asked about with marijuana. So to start off, just to kind of lay the foundation, I think most of us now recognize that adolescents are still, their brain is still developing as they're getting older and getting out of adolescence. And when I talk to teens, I tell them basically doctors never had it figured out. The auto insurers had it figured out because your premiums drop at 25. They know you stop doing stupid things when you're 25. The doctors didn't have it figured out. And we understand now that it's that judgment, that executive function that's still developing. Well, guess what marijuana affects? Just like alcohol, it affects our judgment. And there's a variety of things I'll talk about, but one is that persistent cannabis use was associated with statistically significant decline in cognitive ability in a study that was done in people from birth to age 38. It's an almost 40-year study looking at marijuana use in that cohort, and they found a persistent cognitive decline in people who used marijuana. The more persistent the cannabis use, the greater the cognitive decline. Seems to imply causation, because most of us as scientists know if you do more of something and you see more of an effect, there's usually a causation, not just an association between those. Another study that actually looked at intelligence testing in children, 6 years old, related to prenatal use of marijuana. So moms were using marijuana, found a very similar thing. The prevalence use of marijuana in moms was highest in the prenatal period, not after birth, and actually declined by the time they were 6. So the 6-year-olds were not experiencing a lot of marijuana in their environment per se. And heavy exposure to marijuana during gestation, so during the time when the fetus was in the womb, was significantly associated with poorer performance at 6 years of age on verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and short-term memory. So again, some of the same stuff that we see with our adolescents can happen in children who are exposed in utero. Let's skip that one. A study that was done looking at 4 cohorts. So a lot of the studies that are done with marijuana have to be done on cohorts. What do I mean by that? I mean large groups of patients, because we can't randomize people to marijuana and no marijuana because it's an illegal substance. So it's really not possible to do that easily at this point. So this was another large study, 7,000 patients essentially, over the course of many, many years in Australia and New Zealand. And what they found was increasing cannabis use was associated with increasing depression. Now again, increasing use associated with increasing depression seems to imply there may be a causation. So they did some very fancy statistical tests, way beyond my ability to explain, but basically tried to determine, was there a link between those as cannabis causing the depression or depression causing the cannabis use. We've had this discussion a lot in the medical world about maybe people who use marijuana are just more likely to be depressed and are self-treating. And what they did in their very fancy analysis is they found 2 of the cohorts were associated so that cannabis appeared to be causing the depression. In only 1 of the cohorts did it look like depression was causing the cannabis use. So again, the evidence seems to show that there may be a causation between the marijuana causing the depression as opposed to the opposite, but it still is honestly unclear for those of us in the medical field. Another study that looked at some of the behaviors that people have associated with cannabis use looked at recreational users and binge drinkers, and then those that didn't use marijuana and didn't binge drink. How did they all compare? And what they found was the cannabis group made more impulsive decisions and also more discriminative errors. So basically, they had a really hard time doing tasks that required them to attend to them and make decisions about when to stop doing something. They tend to be more impulsive on the psychometric tests they were doing. Now again, we don't know that cannabis causes that. It may be that people that use marijuana have that innately, and that may predispose them to substance abuse in the first place. They're more impulsive. They're more willing to take those risks. We don't know the answer to that, but again, it's another interesting finding. One that, for me in particular, is important because of my role in a forensic department where I work with sexual assault nurses and I deal with child abuse, is marijuana use and risky sexual behavior. We know what happens with alcohol. There's been at least one study recently, this is from 2012, that looked at marijuana use and risky sexual behavior. I'll start off with a caveat. It was in children, adolescents that were in probation. So again, it's a select group. It's maybe not all of the kids we're talking about. But what they did find is that marijuana use was associated with less frequent condom use. It was associated with greater frequency of sexual encounters, and it was associated with a higher number of sexual partners. So again, it's a different subset maybe than all of our teens, but it certainly suggests that there may be a correlation between those. And then lastly, we often get asked about the risk of cancer. There's a lot of things in our life that cause cancer, and obviously marijuana is primarily used in our society by people smoking it. I'll just say as a physician, it's a no-brainer that smoke causes cancer. Firefighters who don't smoke get lung cancer because they work around smoke. So smoke is not a good thing to put in your body no matter how it gets there, whether it's tobacco smoke or marijuana smoke. But some of the studies that are coming out suggest that marijuana may be at least as dangerous as tobacco as far as the smoke is concerned. They're still sorting some of that out. But in addition, it may cause other cancers. There's at least 2 different studies that have suggested that bladder cancer and prostate and cervical cancer are associated with marijuana use. They're not high associations. There's other things that are much higher associations, but it does suggest that there are, obviously the substance is active in our body, it's going throughout our body, and it may have effects that we hadn't really thought about in different tissues. And so it gives all of us pause to say that marijuana is not dangerous. It certainly, based on its effects, appears most dangerous in our adolescence, but it's probably dangerous for anybody using it at any stage in their life.
Thank you very much, Dr. Howda. Dr. Dowling is next.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you for inviting me, Kate, wherever you are. I'm happy to be here, and actually you stole a little of my thunder, but I have slides, so it'll balance it out a little bit. I'm from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and we have to have slides. It's just the way things are. So, as everybody here in the room knows, marijuana, next to alcohol and cigarettes, is the most commonly abused substance among teens. And now we've also got synthetic cannabis, or spice K2, that has also appeared on the scene, which is which has the same properties as marijuana, and it's also being used at high levels among teens. And this is new data that we've only seen in the last couple of years. So why do people take drugs? Why do people take marijuana? Pretty much for 2 reasons, either to feel good or to feel better, and basically it's because of what it does to the brain. So this is kind of an overview, and it actually speaks to a lot of the things that Dr. Howda was talking about, which is that marijuana acts on many different parts of the brain, and in doing so affects a lot of our behavior and abilities. So he talked about memory and attention. It affects those areas of the brain. It affects areas that are involved in emotion and mood. He talked about depression. It affects areas of the brain that are responsible for coordination. So all of these effects that we associate with marijuana are based on the way it affects the brain. And in talking about smoking, smoking is a very effective delivery mechanism for any drug to get it to the brain fast, and therefore heightens the response and the problems associated with it. So just a couple things that I want to touch on that Dr. Howda also mentioned is it affects coordination and it affects time perception. So these are really important in terms of driving. So this is not necessarily somebody who's addicted to it, but if they're smoking it and then think they can drive, they may not be aware of the effects of the drug on their ability, on their response time, on their ability to respond to situations, and therefore increases their risk of accidents. Dr. Howda talked about memory and IQ, and I'm a neurobiologist and we like pictures of brains. So here's a picture of a brain that actually shows changes in the connections between regions of the brain associated with memory, and which then makes the study that Dr. Howda talked about this drop in IQ, makes sense for us. We understand if the drug is affecting the connectivity, because we know now that the brains of teens are continuing to develop during this period, and in fact, like he said, the areas that are responsible for control of one's behavior and decision making are among the last to develop, that exposing the brain to these drugs at that time is going to have long-term impacts. And this study, as he mentioned, followed people over time and showed a decrease in their IQ over time for those that were using for the longest periods. And interestingly, they also looked at people who were older, who started using older and didn't see that decline. And so what does that result in? If you've got lower IQ, it results in lower grades. It also is associated with higher dropout rates. And long-term use is associated with lower satisfaction in jobs and career, educational achievement, et cetera. And this is something that we are confronted with a lot. A lot of people ask us, tell us, well, marijuana is not addictive, but in fact it is. About 9% of cannabis users become addicted to it, and that number goes up when you're talking about starting when you're a teen. And it goes up even further when you're talking about daily users. And associated with that, there is a withdrawal syndrome. So when somebody is addicted and they stop using, there is a withdrawal syndrome that includes symptoms like irritability, sleeping problems, craving, anxiety, and even aggression. So, our goal at NIDA is really to get this message out there, get information out there so that people can make healthy decisions. Parents can talk to their teens can get the information they need to make decisions, because we know that when people understand the risks associated, they're less likely to use. And this is a long-term study done by the University of Michigan that tracks teen drug use and has since 1975. And it's shown that as teens perceive the risk of a drug, their tendency to use goes down. So we want to get the information out there about the risks, about the harms, so that they can make the right decisions and not use these drugs. And we have a lot of information. In fact, I'll come back and sit over here on our website. We have a general website, and then a website specifically for teens, and some booklets out that we put out on the topic that answer a lot of the questions and hopefully give parents some information to help them talk to their children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dowling. Corporal Toomey?
Thank you. Sorry for my voice. My wife likes the fact that my voice is it's going away, but unfortunately it makes it hard to speak in a panel. I'm going to keep my remarks brief, but basically, from a law standpoint here in Virginia, the law is that marijuana is illegal. What we've been seeing from our school data, from police reports from the public schools here in Arlington County, is that the rise of students using marijuana has shot up in grades 8 and 9 and 10, which is shocking for us because that's such a young age. We knew that drugs are prevalent here in Arlington County. We know that marijuana is prevalent here in Arlington County. We just didn't know that the kids were starting that early. I work at Yorktown High School, so even the seniors come up to me and say that our freshmen are doing things that they didn't do until senior year, which makes me even more shocked. So they are starting a lot younger, which is a concern for law enforcement and how we kind of try to combat that. What's reassuring is that a lot of parents are here tonight, and a lot of parents brought their children with them. And that shows that that's what we need to kind of help a joint effort between the police department, schools, and the parents themselves to kind of get active and involved in their children's life. We've noticed that a lot of times here in Arlington, parents have to work a lot later. They got busy jobs, they got important jobs to do, and unfortunately that leaves a lot of unsupervised time for their teenager. And during that time is when they kind of decide to experiment with alcohol and marijuana use. What we've noticed here in Arlington as well is that the alcohol use among teens is starting to drop. However, with that drop comes the spike in marijuana use. Marijuana is actually more prevalent in our schools and easier for students to get than alcohol is, which is concerning for me as a law enforcement official. There's kind of a disconnect between the students and what marijuana is. They've been hearing a lot of talk about it becoming legalized in other states, and they assume that legalization means that it's okay. And that is why they start using, I'm assuming, a little earlier than what we've seen in our past data. Usually it's between 11th and 12th graders and kids getting ready to go off to college that they start experimenting with marijuana and alcohol. However, like I said, our data has been showing that it's been starting in middle school recently. And the kids coming into 9th grade have already been using for a while and are actually starting to sell to other students at the schools, which is a huge concern for us. As it was explained by the two doctors, it does do learning disabilities, and it leads to kids skipping class, which is a concern for law enforcement. It also leads to a little bit more of a disciplinary problems within our buildings, fights, things getting stolen because these kids are craving this, craving marijuana or want to get it, and they can't ask their parents for $20 to go buy, 2 dime bags of marijuana, so they have to do something else to get that money. And unfortunately, in our schools, a lot of kids have cell phones and other things, and they leave them down and they get stolen. So we've also seen, with the rise of marijuana, we've also seen a rise in our larcenies from our schools, and it's in both middle school and in high school. The Arlington County Police Department has taken a pretty aggressive stance when it comes to marijuana. Our stance is zero tolerance, and it has been for quite some time. If we find a student with residue from a device used to smoke marijuana, we will test that residue, and if it's enough to test and we can get a positive confirmation that it is marijuana, we will charge. And not because we want to see them go to jail, and not because we want to see them get a criminal record, but the courts and through Second Chance program have afforded us the ability to give them the drug counseling that we think they need to make sure that they reduce and stop, ultimately, smoking marijuana and doing alcohol. It's more of a preventative measure. Unfortunately, nowadays, we do have to go through the courts to get that preventative measure out. And I know a lot of parents have some apprehensions about the fact that we just arrested their child and what's that going to do for their college. But with the Second Chance program, which I believe will be explained here in a little bit, it's an actually really good program. The rates of children getting caught again are very low. I think last year, we only had one student who reoffended, which is huge, because we put a lot of students through that Second Chance program. And I think that Second Chance program is a very good way for us to get when we catch them, and it stops them from having a criminal record. It stops them from having a school disciplinary record, which is huge nowadays when kids are trying to be competitive, trying to get into the top colleges here in the United States. The colleges have now put on their applications, have you ever been suspended? Well, if you get caught with marijuana in school prior to the Second Chance, you got suspended for 5 to 10 days, depending on where you were and how much you had. So you would have to list that, and most likely you would not get into your top college. However, with the Second Chance program, it allows the schools to mark it down as an excused absence, so you were not suspended. It allows you not to have a criminal record, so you don't have to put down that you were arrested. on the application, which almost all college applications ask for. So it actually, it allows us as law enforcement officers to kind of engage the students in a little different way. Unfortunately, yes, we are out there to enforce the laws, and we do have to arrest them, part of our job. So we get paid to do, unfortunately, or fortunately. But with that, we are allowed, we've given the flexibility to put children into the Second Chance program for their first offense. And that's a huge step for us, because like I said, most officers don't want to lock up children and put them away. We want to make sure that they get the help that they need so that they can become productive members of society, and that's ultimately what we're looking to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corporal Toomey. And then now we have Chris.
Hi. Don't really know what I'm doing up here compared to these guys, but here we go, I guess. You guys are, what you guys were talking about pretty much sort of tells my experience with school. Like, marijuana was way easier to get than really any other drug, including alcohol. Alcohol was actually really hard because the laws are enforced, and we had to rely on people. I started smoking marijuana in 8th grade, and we had to rely on people with fake IDs, and the number of people with fake IDs in 8th grade is not many. There was one or two, and it sometimes worked, which is baffling now, but you know, that's what we were able to do, and I still remember the day. It's still a clear day. Like, I can remember it. I can go back to it anytime I want. It was in April, is April 20th in 8th grade, and a couple people that I had met in this school, it was Longfellow Middle School in McLean, asked me if I wanted to smoke. And at first they asked me if I did smoke, and I said, yeah, of course. And I hadn't ever smoked, and had no idea what it was about. I was actually terrified of it, because stuff like this, we'd hear about stuff like this in school, a little bit here and there, and I was terrified of becoming addicted and stuff. And you know, I still said yes, and we got out of school that day, and they said, come follow me, and I did, and they rolled a huge brown-looking thing with green leaves in it and lit it up with a lighter and passed it to me, and I was terrified, but you know, I didn't want to be left out. I didn't want to be known as someone who was scared to try new things, and so I smoked it, and felt good. You know what I mean? Like, what you were talking about, people smoke because it makes them feel good. Like, that's exactly what happened. I felt good, and I felt connected, and I felt like I was with a group of people, and ever since then I sort of just connected with them and hung out with them and lost all my old friends eventually, you know, very slowly, and that's sort of what I wanted to be about, you know what I mean? Like, marijuana, man, it's the life, and it's what I did, you know? Before that, I was all year-round athlete. I played baseball pretty much all year round, played basketball and football too, and slowly football dropped away, and then basketball, I got cut from the team, which was heartbreaking. I was high, and baseball, which was like, you know, my love, I wasn't able to make the team because of my grades, and I wasn't getting good grades because I wasn't going to class, and I wasn't going to class because I wanted to get high and hang out, and you know, it seemed very innocent, you know, it's like, you know, I'll take care of it, like, I'll take care of it, you know, eventually I'll take care of it, and what really happened was eventually it got worse, and you know, the use turned from like every now and then, maybe once every couple weeks, to when it was there, till actively looking for it on the weekends, and then actively looking